Today's topic will be covering multiplexing, essentially a licensing query that we get from a load of our customers, where essentially what they don't want to be is non-compliant with Microsoft licensing terms and conditions. Now, for those of you that don't know what multiplexing is, it's the mechanism of providing functionality and capabilities to users who may not be licensed to access that capability. And you may think, oh, actually, how is that even possible? And what I aim to do in this session is show you, one, how that can happen, but two, how we can get around it. And by get around it, I mean be appropriately licensed to access that functionality. So the starting point for all of this is essentially our user. And our user is going to be someone who is going to have to access information. We'll call them Joe in this instance. And Joe here is potentially someone who is going to submit information. And the instance we're going to use here, we're going to touch on Dynamics 365. So with Dynamics 365, we have a mechanism in which Joe enters data, and that could be in an application of some sort. So I quickly sort out my pen there. So we have an application that they're going to access. And that application could be a multitude of different things, but for intents and purposes, this is going to be Dynamics 365 sales. Okay, so Joe will submit information to Dynamics 365 sales and read information from it. With that, they will also get all the functionality available of that tool. So that may include access to charts, visualizations, but also all the logic that comes with Dynamics 365 sales. Now, behind the scenes to this product, you have another product called Dataverse. For those of you that aren't aware what Dataverse is, it's essentially a database in the cloud. There's a lot more to it. There's loads of stuff on APIs and connectors, but we're not going to get into that in today's session. And essentially what we have with Dataverse, we have information being submitted via our app into Dataverse, which then may be processed. Things like business rules may take effect if there's any workflow that's going off in the background. And in this scenario, Joe is fully licensed. They have the correct license, they're submitting information, they're receiving information back from the tool. So in this scenario, what we end up with is a case where actually that is what we call without multiplexing. And apologies for my handwriting here, but all of this is in some Microsoft documentation I can share afterwards. Now, where multiplexing then comes into it is essentially what we have is something called a pooling service. And this is really the mechanism which is allowing people to access information that maybe they shouldn't do. So within Dataverse and within Dynamics 365, I should say, we're going to have a number of tables available to us. Just put those as little boxes here. And those tables may store information such as our opportunities, maybe our orders. What's important though is that that's been made available due to having a licensed product deployed. Other users, so let's say in this instance we'll go with someone called Mary. In this instance, Mary is a non-licensed user. So theoretically, they shouldn't be able to access the information in Dataverse. And at this point in time, Mary doesn't have access to anything in Dataverse. We're just going to quickly pop around onto the other side. However, there is a mechanism which does allow Mary to get access to that information. And that includes, I quickly move her over there. That includes the use of a pooling service. So in our box over here, we'll call this a pooling service. But that could be anything in reality. So one example is information is being passed over to maybe a SQL database. Very well, I say more commonly, a SharePoint list. And then Mary's accessing that via some other method. One example of this could be you have information submitted via the sales app into, let's say, our order table. That is then pushed through into a SharePoint list, and then Mary accesses that via a Canvas Power App. Should put CV in there for now. And essentially what you end up with is Mary's then accessing information that's locked behind a Dynamics 365 sales license, but instead using essentially a use rights license, which they may have with Microsoft 365. The way you get around this, and I use that term very loosely because you're not getting around this necessarily, you need to be licensed and compliant, is that if you did want Mary to access information via that SQL database, that's fine. There's no issue with that. However, Mary would need a license to access the underlying data that sits within Dynamics 365 Sales and Dataverse. It's all good using external services, but in terms of the actual underlying information, Mary's going to need access to that underlying data. Now, in this instance, it doesn't necessarily need to be a full Dynamics 365 sales license. There are alternatives, such as using team member licenses, which may provide access or read-only access to the tables that are required. But the key thing with all of this is Joe is fully licensed, can submit information, which is then stored in Dataverse. Mary currently isn't licensed, and therefore organizations may try to work around it by loading data into things like SQL, SharePoint, or other pooling tools. However, that is fine as long as Mary has a license which covers access to the underlying data that sits within Dataverse, presented by the applications that allow those tables to be created. Now, hopefully my doodles have made a bit of sense and I've talked through it. If there are any other queries, ping them down below. I'll also provide the documentation that Microsoft has that covers this topic. And that documentation provides a vast amount of information and examples that cover SQL and a number of other sources. There are also other licenses which can help around this scenario. One common example we have is users maybe access an external portal but want to access maybe an underlying SQL database, and there are specific licenses that enable you to cover those scenarios. But have a look through the documentation. Any queries, please pass them over. Hope you enjoy the video. It's a slightly different format, so I hope you enjoy the format, and until next time.